Hello, I'm Quentin Lister from Utah Family Law TV. I'm talking today with Morgan Smith, the owner of Utah Data Recovery, and we're going to talk about his firm and what it does in terms of getting access to broken devices and how that relates to family law and other domestic relations cases. But first, as always, Morgan, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give the folks at home some contact information in case they would like to reach you after viewing this, I'll give you the opportunity to do that now.
Okay. Yep. I'm Morgan Smith, the owner of Utah Data Recovery. Our website's the best place to send people because there's more information there and contact forms and whatnot. So utahDataRecovery.com is where you can find us.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So we talked briefly beforehand, and and I also admitted that I myself am completely I'm a new legal assistant, but I'm also new to this whole concept of data recovery and what you do with your career. And so what is it exactly that you do, and what exactly is the service that Utah Data Recovery offers?
Yeah, so we do a couple things. First off is we gain access to broken or damaged devices. So with any sort of a case, there's oftentimes evidence or points to bring up. And sometimes accidents happen to our thumb drives and our hard drives and our cell phones. And so my company has the ability to access information on those devices that are broken. Next up, we recover the data, and that could be pictures, that could be texts, it could be documents, recordings that may have been deleted or may have been damaged or corrupt. And lastly, we also analyze what other evidence has been provided to make sure that it's consistent, that it hasn't been doctored or altered or spoiled in the process of coming to light. So we do that with pretty much all cases. We have been involved in both sides of a number of cases where this service has really helped paint the picture and the story that needed to come out that otherwise would have been really hard to tell.
Yeah. Thank you for that description. And so we might be able to start to guess how this might apply to family law cases, but I think just to make it clear, how have you seen this apply to divorce cases and other family law and domestic relation cases? Or not necessarily, but just like in general, why would someone who is in a divorce case find this useful, for instance?
We had one case in particular where this couple had a prenup signed, and it was drafted up and everything looked great. They each had a copy of it, and they went about the course of their relationship. Well, as that was coming to an end, a copy of the prenup from this side did not match a copy of the prenup from this side. Mm-hmm. And we were brought in to see, what could we say about this from an analysis perspective. And it turns out we were able to find a thumb drive that had one of a particular copy, and that drive itself was no longer functioning. So we had to gain access to that to find the document. And what we were trying to show is the timestamp that was on this document is here, and the timestamp on the document which the other side had provided was a couple months after the fact. And being able to show, well, on this side we've got a couple different copies, one from what he thinks was his last interaction, one from what he thought was his archive copy, versus the other side. We were able to say something's not quite right here with the timestamps on the files. And so that was taken into consideration for which was actually right, and what parts of the document had been edited, and at what times in the timeline that document had been edited. So that was one case with divorce that worked dealt well there. We had another case where a wife and a husband, and the wife started becoming concerned about the husband's activities online, and he was not agreeing with her. He had his own story about what was going on. But one day when she was out of the house, he took the hard drive out of the computer. It was a solid state hard drive. Pliers in one hand, hand in the other, snapped it in half. Well, that really got her attention. Now she was really curious. And it was up to us to take that broken device and get it in a state that we could actually access everything that was on there. And then we could provide it to her and her legal counsel to do with what they needed. So that data wouldn't have been accessible otherwise without recovering that damaged section.
Mhm.
Now, we've also had an interesting case between partners where allegations were being made between the couple. And this side that was making the accusations looked like they had a really strong case. They had recordings of their phone conversations. They had messages going back and forth. Everything looked really good. But we started questioning, well, what about the metadata? So everyone's familiar with documents and pictures, but when you look at the data on a device like a phone, there's data that describes the data. It's metadata. So for instance, a picture might have GPS data embedded in the picture. Audio recordings, if we go look at the waveform and we go look at that audio, we could see if potentially there were splices or cuts. Anyway, in this one particular part of the audio, you could hear in the background there were these cows, and it sounded like they were kind of in the distance and they were mooing. And this person said, well, I made the recording at this time on this day, this phone call, this person. And when we went to that location, there were no livestock areas, no farms, no fields, within several miles of radius. So that started to question, well, was that person really here? When they made that recording, did they edit it? Did they change it and put it back on their device? The further we got into that person's cell phone, one thing we discovered, which was unanticipated, in the internet history, a couple days prior to some accusations being made, there was search terms for how to be a victim and how to manipulate evidence such that it tells a different story than truth. So that was a case that it was important to show not everything being put on the table is as it would seem. So it was worth questioning.
Yeah. So, I mean, from all those things you described, so clearly, right, anyone who is dealing with kind of data presented in a divorce case that they suspect might not be what it is, I guess you kind of help you help verify that to a degree. Is that, I mean,
Yes.
yeah, and so with that, so um, did you always intend for it to be kind of like this, almost like detective work type thing, or was it more, did you have more practical purposes when you first started?
It started out just being recovery, where someone would say, I need these documents and I've broken my thumb drive, but I really need these. This is what I needed to this is where I was collecting everything. And we came on board saying, yeah, we can gain access to that. We've got the tools to do that. A lot of what we do is on the, with personal computers. When it gets into law, there's quite a bit that we're involved in criminal law too, as well as family. But family is a fairly significant portion of what we do. So the legal was more of an addition because, well, now that we have this skill and this ability, what does that mean for helping people who need their story told, or whose cases would fall apart if they don't have access to that one moment, that one thing, that one recording that shows what the other side was really talking about.
Right.
And we feel really, really strongly that if there's evidence like that out there, that it's worth presenting, because with law and family law, and particularly dealing with custody, I mean, it has a big effect on the rest of people's lives and interactions. So that's why we've pursued it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, and it seems like a very natural extension of what you originally started out doing. I had a question. I was wondering if um, how much you see. So obviously, you gave examples of people where it's like there were these suspicions that things weren't as they seemed, and then you were able to use what you do to corroborate that, or to kind of give validation to that suspicion. How often is it the case that somebody like suspects something might be amiss, and then you go and you look at it and you're like, oh, actually, no, there's nothing really amiss here. I don't. Have you had an experience like that, or is it typically like people come to you when it's like, they know for a fact and they just need somebody to just get them over the hump in terms of proof. Yeah, does that question make sense?
Yeah, so a lot of the times people are fairly sure something's going on,
Hmm.
and they just don't necessarily either have the means to bring that to light, or things that have been deleted that they knew they had that they wanted. For
Gotcha.
instance, it's possible for someone to gain access to your cell phone and delete a couple messages.
Right.
And the person's like, I know I had those. Can you help get them back? In instances where people are just suspicious, there's the real challenge of custody, and we obviously can't examine things that we don't have legal
Right.
authority to do so.
Right.
However, we have been involved in mediation processes where we can say, well, this is what we're able to do. If everybody's okay with that and we're authorized, we can go ahead and do this. And rather than actually going through that process, it helped start an honest conversation between both parties of well, now that we know what's capable, let's put all our cards on the table and go from there. So there's several different paths that it takes. It doesn't always have to end up in just strictly confirming what someone said. Just knowing that, well, there are technical people that are outside of these two parties that are neutral that can be used as a resource if necessary. And sometimes that's all it takes to get some cooperation to get things to work out right.
Mm. Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And one question I imagine people might have is how long does the process usually take? I mean, it might depend on like the extent of damage on a certain device, but how on like on what you see on average, typically like how long is like does that process of like exploring and then like looking and trying to recover the data, how long does that typically take? Or is it
Uh,
different every
yeah.
time?
You're right that different degrees of damage take different amounts of time to overcome. So some devices we can get recovered and restored within, a couple days. Some devices that are more heavily or extensively damaged, it could take weeks or a month or two to get that information. To do analysis usually takes a week or two to go over the information that we've got, if that's what we need to do. We have had some cases that are long and drawn out just because the people pursuing it aren't pushing very hard. They're trying to get a feel for maybe they've got a couple options for where they wish to go with their partners or with the children, and they're hesitant, and so we're willing to work with them. Really, as long as necessary, or as little as necessary. Our main goal is to really be effective, though. The last thing we want to do is to extend something beyond what's actually reasonable.
Right.
For instance, we had one case where there was a family unit involved, and they were going over issues with the child's competency. There was a scam involved, and lots of money lost. And we had an enormous amount of behavioral evidence to analyze for the child. And really, we were able to focus in on a couple key points. Like one, this scam involved a Bitcoin account. So we were able to say, well, this person has access to Bitcoin. They're smart enough to know how to go through an exchange. Here's a record of the different transactions that happen in the wallet. So there's a high degree of competency. Next, the question was, well, is there coercion? So there was a lot of other supporting evidence that we didn't necessarily feel was pertinent to the case. So we were able to get through that really fast. It probably took us about 2 weeks before we had our report on what we felt the child's capabilities were and their level of development and understanding, with which the attorney then took it to, ask about, well, how much coercion was involved in this, and did they really understand what they were doing? And so that one, our involvement was just a couple of weeks, although that case took like 6 months. to actually
Mhm.
get resolved.
Well, yeah. Huh. And so, yeah, no, that's really it's really fascinating stuff to me. I guess I'm trying to think. I feel that maybe another, you know, perhaps one more question that comes to mind is like if I was like a client, so people who are involved in divorce and family law cases, they're usually spending a fair amount of money if they're able, they're hiring legal counsel and whatnot. And so with your services and whatnot, obviously it seems like it would be worth it, but I am curious what your price range typically is. If you come, I mean, yeah,
Yeah. So they do change a little case to case depending on who's going to be involved and the kind of analysis that needs to be done. Generally, we do our consultations for free because I'd much rather everybody understand what's available and what we can do before they make the decision. I don't want anybody putting money down and then, oh, we didn't deliver what, we said we could. So the conversations are upfront and free. Repairing devices, if it's just a bit of corruption, sometimes we can get the corruption resolved and items recovered, for the $300 range. If we're handling like a criminal case where we're handling multiple devices and examining what the state gives back, that could be like a $4,000 process. But we do wish to say this is what we can do and get it approved before we actually take an action.
right,
Because in some cases, although we could potentially go down this rabbit hole, effectually and according to the law, this is a more effective route to go for the means, the ends to where the client's going for. So it's
sure,
a bit of a wide range because it's a wide degree of processes.
right. Then yeah, just that makes sense. And so you definitely have to take that case by case. But yeah, no, those are kind of the basic questions I have. I know that our time is coming to an end here, but is there any other final thoughts you would want to leave with people who might be watching this at home who are interested in learning more about data recovery and how it can help them in their case?
Yeah. There is a bit of info on our website, but ultimately it comes down to does the person believe that they have information that they would like to provide for their case that would be significant that they can't necessarily produce because the device is broken or it was corrupt, or that they suspect the other side may have tampered or spoiled, some of the evidence. That's a good point to start asking. Hey, can you guys do anything with this? If there's a possibility of child abuse, particularly when it goes criminal with sexual exploitation, we have a lot of resources available to us to follow up on that and make sure things get handled appropriately with law enforcement and with attorneys. It's much better to bring in an expert instead of wing it yourself. A lot of people think that, well, I can certainly save this document, not knowing that it alters timestamps or other metadata. So we really do help in the collection, the preservation of information too. So if you suspect that something might be a little over what you've usually been accustomed to, it's at least worth asking questions so that you're fully aware of what options are available to you. Because nothing's worse than having something inadmissible or inaccessible, when you really need it, and you got other family members that are potentially dependent on your side of the story.
Right. Well, thank you, Morgan, once again for your time, and thank you for your answers. Would you be willing to give just your name and contact information one more time before we close up?
Yeah, so I'm Morgan Smith, the owner of Utah Data Recovery. And the best way to reach us is actually on our site because we list our numbers there. We have chat there, and contact forms. So UtahDataRecovery.com. And we're local. Man, this is where we live and where we grow.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Morgan. Have a good rest
Yeah,
of your
thank you.
day.